Right, so when I started to try and work out how I wanted to make my animal sculptures, I looked at coiling and I looked at slab building, and both there was a lot of drying time. So you would have to start a sculpture and then wait for it to do a little bit drying before you could continue. That really, really didn't suit me. I can't have more than one sculpture on a go because I get into the mood and the spirit of that particular animal, and I want to finish it. So this method of making, you can make from start to finish without any drying time. Okay, so the benefits of that is just limitless, because you think the clay is always soft, so it's always fluid, so you always have that fluidity. Whereas when you let a piece dry, you've kind of got to get your process right as you go along. Whereas with this, I always tell my students, there is nothing that you can do, you can make no mistakes that I can't overcome in 5 to 10 minutes flat. And that's at any point in the making process. So when I'm teaching, it's just such a lovely thing to teach because everybody's relaxed. I can overcome everything because of the chicken wire frame underneath. Okay, so with the chicken wire, I'm going to make a hare, by the way. I always forget to tell people what I'm making. I'm going to make a hare. I actually have an animal sanctuary, and so my instant thing was I'm going to make a donkey, because I love donkeys. Yeah, you know I love my donkeys. But actually, hares, if any of you are wanting to have a go at this when you go home, always start with a hare. The reason why is they've got great big feet, great big ears, and they're just fun. We don't see them very often, so you can really go on the caricature, and people don't really know exactly what they look like, so you get away with quite a lot with a hare. So I've done the hare, so if any of you want to go home and have a go, this is the animal to do. All right, so let's get started. So when I'm sculpting, I actually sculpt with 2 different types of clay. Earthstone hand build is an ES40 Valentine's clay. I don't know if Hannah's still in here and I'm promoting her material for her. Always go for a nice expensive clay. It makes your life so much easier. All right, I can't work with terracotta. I don't know how anybody does. This is just, it's much easier to work with. So I work with this clay for detail. It's brilliant for getting really precise detail or strength. The paper clay is great for texture because as you pull away, obviously you're too far away at the moment, but as you pull away, I don't know if the camera's picking it up, you get these fine detail of the feathering of the paper. So I use one clay for texture to get that loose, fluid movement, and then I use one for detail. So you're using 2 different clays throughout the making process. So, chicken wire frame. I start with the grogged clay. You can see this is a normal consistency, just straight from the bag, ES40, and I pinch out. Now this is just going to go along the base. If I wrap this up around the chicken wire frame, it's going to shrink and crack, okay? Because this is, it's not got the shrinkage properties that paper clay have. So just pinch out along thin base. Always prefer to pinch, like if rolling, you're stretching the particles away from each other, and it's never quite as strong as if you just pinch. And you have more control over the size of it as well. All right, so that will sit like that. I then get some of my hessian. It's just brown sacking material, but you can see it's got a very open weave. Now the open weave is really important because the clay needs to work through that weave. So I'm just going to lay, without any extra clay, I'm just going to lay that on top of there like that. Is the camera getting that? And then that stops the chicken wire pushing through the clay. Okay. From there, I grab my hessian and I go into the paper clay. Now, can you see how wet this is? Now, my students actually prefer it wetter than this, and they would be moaning a lot if I gave them this clay. Yeah, you all would, because it's harder to get into the weave. So if you were mixing this up yourself, you'd want a little bit more water in it. I quite like it quite dry, and I get used to using it, but yeah. So can you see how I'm just pushing the slurry into the weave, both sides, like that, until you can't see the weave, like that. I then lift up the clay underneath, overlap by 1 or 2 centimetres, and then wrap it around the chicken wire. So this is like a glamorous version of paper mache. Paper mache that is suitable for the kiln. All right, so this is all goes straight in the kiln. So after firing, the chicken wire almost sort of crumbles and disintegrates inside, and it's all locked inside, so it doesn't affect your elements or your kiln shelves or any other thing that people come up with. It just stays locked inside the sculpture, and sometimes when you lift my sculptures up, you can actually, if you shake them, you can hear little bits falling around inside, and that's just literally the chicken wire. In the kiln, the rest of it, so the paper fibres in this clay and the Hessian fibres, they will all burn away. Now, when people say, should you be putting this in the kiln? Chicken wire, absolutely fine to go in the kiln as long as it's locked inside the clay body. The Hessian and the paper, that will start to affect your elements, I'm not going to lie, and it creates a very smoky, you don't want to be in the same building as your kiln when you're firing, okay? It's really, really smoky. But it burns away. It does create a bit of a reduction in the kiln, because as it's burning, it's basically grasping for oxygen, and it does take a layer off of your elements. But if you follow a bisque firing, that's your first firing, where you're burning all this off, if you follow that with a glaze firing or a stain firing, that oxygen layer is just put straight back onto your elements, and I don't notice my element lifespan being any less than any other potter who works as intensively as I do. So does it affect your kiln? No. Do you want to be in the same building as the firing? 100% no. It smells like a bonfire, and it pretty much is. So just literally go around, and I would cover the entire thing, going exactly like that. I do one layer all over, and then I do another layer, and then you're done. So as long as you've got 2 layers, this one I made earlier, all over, there you go. Now, the reason for putting the grogged clay on the bottom is just because it's not as sticky as the paper clay. If I'd put the paper clay at the bottom, the clay would have stuck to the board, and you would just have a layer of Hessian going on the kiln shelf. Whereas by putting that strip of that grogged clay on the bottom, it shrinks in because it's not going over the curve, because this clay cannot go around the curve of the chicken wire. Its shrinkage is too high, and it would crack. But if I just have it along the bottom, that shrinks in, and the paper clay and the Hessian, you know, they used straw in building, didn't they? And what was the straw doing? It was just locking it together so that it didn't crack. The Hessian is doing exactly the same thing. So this Hessian and paper clay is taking the pressures round the curve, so as the clay shrinks, it can't crack because there's so much material in there binding it together. Does that make any sense to everyone? Yeah? Please ask questions if it's not. It's quite complicated. The paper fibres, they also help with the binding, just like the Hessian is, but it also helps transport moisture throughout the sculpture. So what do trees do? They're constantly transporting water. The paper fibres are doing that in my clay. So all the time it's keeping the whole sculpture sort of even moisture all over, instead of drying out heavily in one place and then not in the other. And that's when you get cracking. Okay? All right, so now on to the sculpting bit. So I've got my hair here. First of all, I always go straight into the anatomy. If you think about the anatomy first, when you've got this blobs, and just draw it in place, and then you can start the sculpting. So with this framework, I have done anything large and bulbous. All the other bits will be added on afterwards. So I've got my head, I've got my body, my rib cage coming through here, and then I've got the first part of my leg, my hind quarter, and that's just sitting in there like that. So I'm going to have 2 front legs coming out here, and I'm going to have both back legs coming out and just sitting out here. So I've got a reclining hair. All right. So start by drawing your spine on. And it doesn't matter what pose you're doing, even if it's a completely straight spine, just draw your spine on. You'll rub it out later, but if you've got that of a reference, everything else will just fall off the spine. All right, so I'm gonna, because my body is curving with the back legs going to one side, I'm gonna start at the back there, and it's just gonna curve round like that to there. Can you see that? Yeah. I'm gonna come to the front, and I'm thinking about this hind quarter and coming up to my hip bones, which will be starting either side of my spine line. And I'll just mark those 2 hip bones on, draw down, and that is my hind quarter. Here at the front is a bit more confusing. Okay, so start with your shoulder blades. So you're going to have 2 lines just either side of the spine line like that. They are your shoulder blades, okay? I think of this area like a triangle that extends. So you've got your shoulder blade here. I call it a chest bone on the animals because they're so far forward. It's the easiest reference for my students. So you've got chest bone, and then you've got the elbow. And those 3 points make a triangle on the animal. Okay, so I'm going to go straight to the elbow. And here on this hair, I'm going to have his legs stretched right the way forward. So the elbow can be anywhere from about there, right the way forward to about there. I'm going to have my elbow nice and forward, so my hair is just stretching out in the reclining position. So imaginary elbow is going to be here. That will be added when I add my leg. I then draw up to my chest bone. Now my chest bones, my shoulders were really close together, but my chest bones then come away from each other as far forward as possible and about halfway up. Okay? And I'm going to draw this on now. So you do a line from the front of your shoulder blade to your chest bone, and then that one will go to your imaginary elbow. Okay? And then you go back. This will make sense in a bit. I assure you. Go back. And can you see that movement? That is your muscle, your bone, and your movement of the front legs. Okay? I'll do the same the other side. Just whip it through like that. Now, we're going to start to make it look less like a blob by literally just pushing in. You have got chicken wire underneath, so you can literally just push away and work with it any way you like. It doesn't matter if you make a massive mistake like that, because you stick your tool in, you pull it out like that, and it's over there, and fill it up with a blob. Because there's chicken wire underneath, you can't make a mistake that I can't overcome. It's that easy to work with. And I don't think anybody else would be doing a mistake like that on this stage, because it would take them so long to overcome. All right, but you've got chicken wire underneath, saving you. So, there we go. You can see my hind quarter coming on here. Here, this area here is a lot more sensitive. So though you want to be pushing the rib cage down so it's lower than this muscle, you want to do it quite subtly. So the rib cage should just be flowing underneath. Haven't worked upside down for a bit. Been several years. There we go. You can see that's just flowing underneath. I then go in and just tap my rib cage. Make sure my rib cage is a nice shape. Get any lumps and bumps out. I tend to use a tool more than my thumb, purely because I'm working with the slurry. When you're working with the grog clay, I tend to use my thumbs a lot more, whereas with the slurry, you very quickly learn to use your tool more, otherwise you're just getting a gooey mess. All right, so then I'm just going to start to shape those shoulder blades. It's very subtle, this area here, which is why it's the most complicated bit. You can see I'm just getting light definition there, and I come in to make that triangle. This triangle will make a lot more sense once the leg's added. So there we go, like that. And you can start to see it shaping up. I'd then go around the other side and just pull that in, and that will go in a lot more because if you think of the pose, that elbow is going to be sticking out to the side. Like that. All right, so there you go. Let's put some legs on. All right, so front legs. When making a front leg, let's do one I did earlier. Start at the toe and work your way back. It's like pulling a handle on a mug. So I start with my foot, sculpt that in roughly. As I come back, so you think of their leg, it's like your arm. That's their foot. Then their joint is really close to the foot. It's not in the middle there because that elbow is further up. So that elbow is all the way here. So you're wanting to get the width there for the paw, narrowing, widening for the knuckle, and then narrowing again. So you'll see me do this. Are we getting it? Like that. So narrow, widen for the knuckle, and narrow after, and then just pinch up the leg. And can you see I turn it as I go to make sure it's nice and round? And I'm gaining more muscle as I go up the leg. I will then tear off at an angle like that, and that angle will just sit against there. Like that. All right. You can then start to play with length if you want them a bit shorter. So I don't really worry about length or size at this point. I literally get it to that point. Then if I wanted more width, I could just add a little bit, or I can take away. It's hard enough getting the shape and then thinking about the size at the same time. Always think about the shape first, then look at getting the size right. Okay, so I've got that. I'll then just clean that up a little bit. You can see I just use this palette knife tool just to run over it and get the worst lumps and bumps out. There we go. All right, now I'm going to start sculpting the tops of the feet. So tops of the feet, it's the pads that are the really fun bit. The tops of the feet are a little bit more tricky. All right, so I'm thinking about these toes. All right, start with your middle toe. So there's 4 toes, and then the dew claw is further up. So you only have to think about 4, which makes it really nice and easy because you can go straight for the centre mark. Now you can see I just made that mark there. I'll then come round the side, and their second toe sits right the way back, like that. Are we getting this at all? Like that, and then over. So can you see how I'm creating an angle change? Can you see that? In the knuckle. Get your joints in your toes, and all of a sudden it will come to life. If you don't get those joints, they just look odd. So you can see I'm just shaping those toes. like that. And the same the other side. You can see how I really push those two side toes back to make them recessive. Like that. Okay. Now can you see how I'm pinching in here? Am I off camera? There we go. So I'm pinching in there to get those little knuckles forming either side. And then behind that, I will just scrape away ever so slightly, clean that up a little bit, scrape away any excess. And you can see that little paw appearing. Clear up the lines. There we go. And then we just rub those lines out as we come into that knuckle, this joint here, as we go in. There we go. Now, as I go up the leg, I'm going to do this side, I'll pull it there. I will just get this tool and just scoop underneath out, giving that little tendon underneath. So there's a little tendon that just runs under there like that, sorry. It's so difficult when you can't see what you're doing. Sculpting blind. There we go. All right. So there's our leg. Let me just turn around and see if it's... That is good enough for today. All right. Now, obviously this is the grogged clay. This is the grogged clay, that's the paper clay. Now I'm looking at joining the two different clays together. Okay? So I've taken off at an angle so that it sits nicely against the leg there. What you don't want to have is it sitting all the way over there and him doing that. You want to make sure it looks like they're sitting underneath. So we're going to sit it there. We will cross-hatch and wet. So cross-hatching and wetting, for those of you who haven't done any clay, is just like adding glue. There we go, piece of hay there. As I own a sanctuary, there just tends to be hay everywhere in my life. The animals, yeah, there's hay in my bedroom, there's hay all over my house, because I actually have a pig who he came to us with a heart deformity. Yeah, right. He now lives in the house because he had a heart deformity and only had a few months to live. I think he's been in the house. Well, he's been in the house since December. Yeah, and he has a big straw bed in our hallway, and he burrows underneath the bed, then runs out in one of his fits of joy with straw and hay all over his back and spreads it all over my house. The joys of having a piglet in the house. Oh, there he is. That's him with my dog, Cozzy, curled up on the kitchen sofa. Well done. You're on it. So cute, aren't they? He's actually really naughty. We don't have a house telephone at the moment because he's chewed through the cable. I know. People can hear me, I just can't hear them. So I'm on the phone going, I know you can hear me. I can't hear you. The pig's chewed through the cable. I'm really sorry. It's like, oh my God, I sound like a nutcase. All right, so I'm just blending that in like that. On this inside join in there, I will just get a bit of the grog clay and just push it in to there like that. There we go. I'm then just going to get the bone just going along like that. Can you see those little lines? And this is allowing this muscle to flow down into the leg. There we go. Next, to do this join, we've done the cross-hatching and wetting. We're now going to do a Hessian wrap over the top. So I cut a little square, whack it in the slurry of paper clay, just like before, but this time, both sides. Always make sure you do it both sides. This time, I'm just going to make it into a mussel shape. So whenever I talk about a mussel shape, you want it tapering off at either ends. So you've got it wide in the middle or slightly at one end, and then tapering off like that. That is then just going to sit over the join like that. It's going to be the mussel, but it's also going to be you're connecting the two different clays together. So you cross-hatch and wet the two clays, just like you normally would, and then you always lay a piece of hessian and slurry over the top, and that will just bind the two different clays together. All right? So where have I put my tool? There we go. And then I will just sculpt that in. Always end your leg with a nice little knuckle. Sorry, I've got to turn around to do this. There we go. Always end with that little knuckle. You think of our elbow, you always want to make sure that you've got the bone sticking out at the back. So, like that. And can you see this movement in this area here, just flowing off into the leg? Let me just check it. Yeah, that's right. Back a bit on there. So you can see I've just built up that a tiny bit just by adding a little bit, just to get that muscle coming round and the extra skin and folds of the hair. And that's how you join a leg. All right, let's go for the back legs. Back legs, think of them like a zigzag. Let me just check my timing. Think of them like a zigzag. So you have your next one going down like that. Wider at the top, same with this one, wider at the top, narrowing as you go down. Wide at the top, narrowing as you go down. So you've got that. Then your opposite, you're wider at the paw and narrower as you're going into the leg. And can you see that zigzag? 1, 2, 3. Now I always lay them like this so that you can then play with the positioning that you want. And you can literally do it any way you want. I'm just going to do mine like that so that you can see the zigzag clearly. All right. So first of all, you can see with this muscle, this leg here, I've got the bone at the front and then it's thinner at the back. All right. Always do an angle as it's attaching to the body like that. Once again, I would just cross-hatch, wet, and whack it on. No finesse. And blend it on. So if you've got a dog in the house, this is really helpful because you can actually pull the dog's leg around and see actually how it's working. Cats are not so biddable on all of that. My poor girl, she was so used to being in the studio right from a little pup. She will actually be fast asleep and I'm showing my students her leg, pulling it in and out. She snores right the way through the whole process. So I go underneath and I just whack a little bit of grogged clay underneath, just like I did on that bit in that leg there. So you're always making sure that you've got a nice strong join and it doesn't go skinny at any point. You don't want a weakness in the leg. So I've got like that. Now I'm just going to do my little hessian overlap. And this one, there's no particular muscle that I'm desperate to try and get. Not at this point anyway. So I literally just get the slab, put it exactly over the join like that, and just blend it in. And that's literally sandwiching the two clays together so you're not going to have any breakages. It's not going to come apart. There you go. You can start to see this back leg just starting to appear. At the hips, I always like to slightly curve off a little bit so you get your straight spine, and then I just get my hand and make sure at those hips it sort of angles off. They always slope and curve round a little bit, and that's just what I'm getting there. Okay. Next bit, we are going to make a paw. My favourite bit. I love this bit. I think students love the top, don't they? Sorry, they love the bottom. They don't love the top. Yeah. I get a lot of complaints when we go to do that bit, but I get a lot of love when we're doing that bit. Okay. So, I've got one made here. So I pinch the leg out just like I did with this one here, and then make sure it's really nice and smooth before you start. If it's not smooth and it's bumpy, you're onto a loss straight away. It makes all the sculpting that much harder. So, flat side is where the pad's going. The slight curved side is the top. So I'm going to do underneath first. I'll hold it like that. And make sure I've got a clean tool, not covered in slurry. At this point I'd wash my hands, by the way, so I didn't contaminate everything. Go a line, centre line, straight up. Now, most dogs and cats and that, this line would be much shorter and the end would be round. Whereas with the hare, you want the really nice long toes. So I've very much got a pointy end. But with a dog and everything like that, you just do a much blunter end, and then this line would only come to about there. All right? So we've got that coming to about there. We then take your side toe and do that line going there, and the same there. Like that. We then go back, and that is just me drawing on my lines. I'm then going to go in and create the movement in the toes. So they're not flat. Animals have huge amounts of movement in that area. So that's what we're going to do now, is just get that flexibility in them. So we're going to draw down and draw across. And can you see how I keep leaning over, so the pad is actually working its way away from the leg. And then this bit here, that is your pad. And that bit there is just basically the levering. All right, I'll do the same with the other one. So you can see I just push it back and then just angle my tool and stroke the clay. I don't expect to do this in like one swift movement. You know, I'm constantly stroking the clay with my tool, moving, adjusting. It's time consuming. And this is my quickest sculpture, you know. The donkeys take forever. All right. So can you see those toes now have that movability from the pad? Then the side toes, exactly the same thing. We're just levering away. Sorry. Not used to the cameras. There you go. So you've got your toes. You can pull them all back in. Obviously, I would then spend ages cleaning it all up and making it look pretty. Haven't got time for that today. I'm not going to bore you. All right, so now I'm tapping down. You can see when I say tapping, I'm sort of rounding edges. And a lot to do with sculpture is just literally softening your edges and making them natural. I will then come round there, and I'm just making that bottom pad. Like that. And then just creating very soft little dimples in there. You might want to use your hands a little bit more because we're on the grogged clay. I just get so used to using a tool all the time that I don't actually use my hands that often. But I know students much prefer to use their hands a lot more, purely because, you know, I've sculpted with these for 15 years. This is just an extension of my hand. For you, you'll be picking up the tool and it's a foreign item, so you'll be more accurate with your your thumb or your finger or whatever. I used to do a lot of kayaking. Now I've traded in my paddle for a saddle and I do a lot of riding, obviously, with an animal sanctuary. But yeah, the paddle should always be an extension of your arms, and the tool should be an extension of your hands over time. Though I have worn this tool away to that size. It's so small now, I've got to trade it in after 15 years of use. Yeah, I pick up a new tool and I can't use it. So I'm getting a little bit worried. Okay, so you can see I've just got my pads going like that. I'm now just going to shave off . And have that sitting like that. Now, obviously I'd do the top, but that is exactly the same as what I did there. So, yeah, this is exactly the same thing, it's just on a bigger scale. So if you're doing it for the first time, you always want to do the bigger one first, then do the finer one, because it's so much harder. Okay, so let's get these back legs in position. So this one needs a little part of that second bone. Doesn't need much because it's going to be under the body, but just a little bit to attach. So crosshatch, wet. This is the same clay going on each other, so it's both grogged clay, so I don't have to do that overlap with the Hessian that I did before. All right, wrong tool. But exactly the same as before, I always put that little blob just in the join there and blend that in. And that can actually be the little tendon that's going between, and it's helping strengthen as well. So there you go. So that's, you can get your little knuckle, just make sure your knuckle's sort of sitting there at the back, going up like that. Now that is just going to go under the body there. All right, so I'm going to cross hatch. And wet. And it will just sit under there like that. That leg will sit on there, and you've got your 2 feet and you can play with them a bit on however you like. All right, you would attach that the exact same way as that. This one, you want to push and roll your hair back onto it. I then tend to lean back and just blend over like that. Remember, you've got the chicken wire inside, so it's actually so strong that you can actually move it about a lot more than you think. Then blend up, and then I do my Hessian overlap. So, just like before, tiny little piece, and that will just sit in there, joining that together. Now be careful here, because you want to make sure that the leg looks like it's separate from the body. So though you're joining it so it can't come away, you still need that line there to make sure it looks separate from the body. And there you go. You have got your basic hair body. And we can now move on to the head. All right, upside down. I'll do my best. Okay, so remember what I said before. Whenever I go onto detail, I want to go onto the grogged clay. That is really, really important when you're doing the face. But you don't want too much grogged clay going over the curves, because that's when you get the cracking. All right, so I'm going to get, probably best to show that way, yeah. I'm going to get a little blob, and I'm going to whack it on for the nose. But be careful not to blend it too far back. You're just working with a few little rules. And I think they're easier than having to wait an hour for something to dry and getting really frustrated. I've not got much patience when it comes to drying time. So you can see I'm just blending it back a tiny bit. Just going to spin it round. Check what I'm doing. There we go. Fine. All right. So at this point, I'm just looking to get nice round muzzle and then curving for the hair. Now the hairs are great because they're a prey animal. Predators, so when you're doing a dog or any predator, their eyes are facing forward to judge distance, and they are really hard. So even if you decide not to do a hair for your first animal, make sure it's a prey animal that you only have to focus on one side and then the other, and then a little bit of symmetricalness at the front, because yeah, getting it symmetrical is tough. So get the contour lines of the face before you do anything. You always want to race straight into doing the eyes and the nose and the detail. But if your contour lines are not right, everything's going to be skew with. All right, so what I mean by that, with a prey animal like this, it is normally that sort of shape. And these rules actually do go to other animals. It's quite impressive, especially like all this anatomy knowledge. Even when you go to African wildlife, they're maybe longer or stretched in places, but the actual anatomy tends to be fairly similar. So you can take these rules to pretty much any animal you choose to do. So can you see, I start at the back of the muzzle and I go up through the eye and under the ear. And if you do that line on both sides, and then dig in. You see that lovely chicken wire just coming in, so you can actually press in quite deeply. And this is what I mean by the contour lines of the head. Because if you get these lines in and you get it symmetrical both sides, I'm not going to play too much with the other side, but if you get that symmetrical, then when you put your eyes in, they're automatically going to be symmetrical. With the dogs, it's really essential. Yeah, so dogs, it's a bit different. Just get a bit of a muzzle. So you've got your long muzzle going like that, and you've got the back of your head like that. Do excuse my shape of my dog's head. Like that. There we go. So with a dog's head, it's actually an upside down Y, like that. And they are your contour lines, okay? So I don't know, can you see this? Upside down Y. So it goes either side of the eyes and then up the top of your head, and they are your contour lines. So your eyes are then looking forward. All right, so very different to the hair. Much easier with the hair. Okay, so at this point, you can draw on the lines for the eyes. I'm just going to tilt it round. So you can see those two lines, one, then two. So one is going down towards the muzzle, and the other one is horizontal line. And that, where we get the scissors, how we chop. Oh, you love this bit. Oh, you do. This is when I'm in the studio and everybody's got to this point on their sculptures and they're getting very precious about them. And then I pick up the scissors and make them chop into them. And we get a lot of gasps, don't we? Some are more dramatic than others. Some chicken out and I have to do it. We get, yeah, very dramatic. So, wide on the blade. It's not going to cut here on the blade. You have to go right back here. So it's quite barbaric. I'm praying these are new scissors. I didn't check them before I left, and I'm thinking now I really should have checked these scissors. Do a couple of little cuts to get through the Hessian. Once I've got through the Hessian, I do blunt scissors. You should get a nice springy chop. There we go, I'm actually 3, they're not too blunt. So we've done one massive cut, then we're going to go in the bottom line and do that. Oh, that was better. All right, this hole can only be too small. It can't be too big, because what I'm doing is just getting all the rubbish out of the way and packing it all back down like that. I know it looks barbaric, I know it looks awful. Be covered up very, very quickly. All right, nice big hole. We then get the grogged clay because it's the easier one to work with, it's much more detailed. And we create almost like a muscle shape again for the eyebrow. So narrow at the front, we're just going to bend slightly to get that eyebrow, and then come back. And I'm just going to adjust it against the size of my hair. And I'm just going to sit that in there, like that. Get my angle, sorry, won't be a minute. There's only so much you can do upside down. There we go. And then that will just blend back. But remember what I said about you don't want to blend too far, because if these two eyebrows touch, that clay will crack over that curve. You need the paper clay taking the curve. So I'm just blending it down, back ever so slightly, and getting that angle change. That angle change is really essential. We can now close the eye up. Let me just... There we go. We'll close the eye up with the lower lid. So I'm just pinching out. So this is much thinner than before. But once again, same what I call a muscle shape. And you want to get the top really nice and smooth. Because as that sits in there, it's just going to close the eye up and get that little sleepy eye like that. Okay. I will then just make sure the lower lid is sitting under the upper lid. Otherwise it can look very odd. I'm just going to be shaping in there a little bit like that. And just do a little line underneath like that. There we go. Obviously I'd normally add a lot more detail at this point, and I spend a long time doing the eyes. It's actually really important. I know it's just a hole in my pieces, but I actually spend a long time placing that hole and making sure the shape of the hole is actually correct. Obviously today I'm doing it very, very quickly, looking at the time. Okay, let's whip onto the nose. So the nose on the hair, I think, is the best bit. It's so sweet to get that little twitching nose. It's so cute. So first of all, make sure this muzzle is nice and round and smooth, and then that will make everything easier. Just have a quick check. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to go for a little triangle nose. Going to make the shape first. I'm not worrying about this top bit. I'm just worrying about the bit in between my index finger and my thumb. Making sure you get those angles nice. Because once it's on, that's just going to blend back like that. Whereas those lines at the front are going to stay. You just whip round, check, great. Then blend out at the sides. And I almost get like a little diamond sitting there, like that. You can see I've moved on to a smaller tool now. Wider at the top, narrower as you go down. Like that. People want to go straight into the mouth. Remember this bit? We just want a little line going down like that. You getting this? Yeah, you getting this. Great. And then teddy bear mouth underneath. So we want to go under the jowl and then up at the end. Let me just check that. Won't be a sec. So, nearly done. How much longer do I have? 5 minutes? Yeah, brilliant. Perfect. I better move on. Teddy bear mouth there. And let's whip onto an ear so we get a bit of fun with the ear. All right. Ears are great fun. So start with your lump of clay. Make the point. Like that. Keep it thicker than you think. All right, it's much better that it's strong after the firing than it's, it's heavy. It doesn't matter as long as it survives, after the firing, basically. It's nice and strong when it's in someone's house. So I keep it thick in the middle. I create a boat shape like that. You can thin your edges down later. And then start to tear a bit off. Which way am I doing it? That way. You see I'm tearing off at an angle like that. I will then go in with the round bit of this tool and I just push out from inside just to get that nice bulbous bit. Pinch out, and you see my hare's ear appearing. Get that little shape. At this point, I would then refine the edges. Obviously, do not have time to refine. Like that. You would then cross-hatch and wet, of course. And it would just stick on there like that. Skewers are the answer. Think of a cross and it will sit in the cross like that. Always do the back ear higher, front ear lower like that. Now I'm just going to quickly whip you onto some texture. Texture is great. So we're back to the slurry and you can literally just whack it on like you would like a palette knife, almost like oil painting. It's just great. You can do flicks. So around here, I whack a lump on, and I create these lovely little wispy bits around the head, where there's longer hair. I love doing cockapoos purely because of these lovely little wisps that they have going on. You get a nice little ruffle at the front of the chest. And so on this bit, you can really, really have fun. I trim the feet as well. So you can get a little coil going around like that. Blend it back. And then flick forward. And you just get those lovely little fluffy feet. All right, I better call it a day there. I could go on forever. There we go. All right. Thank you, everybody. All right. Oh, do check out my exhibition stand and have a little look. Obviously, I do have the animal sanctuary, and we own a holiday retreat to help fund completely funds the animal sanctuary. So do take a look at my exhibition stand and pick up a leaflet. All right, thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.